Hello, can you all hear me? Thank you. And I wish to thank the First Nation owners of the land here for welcoming me to this wonderful conference, as well as to all the conference organisers. In the Museum of Anthropology, we saw images of the raven, who is the transformer, and who stole light and let it out to illuminate the world. And without light, we cannot see colours. I wish to thank Dominique Cardon and Elena Vips-Tamien also for laying the groundwork in talking about chromatic space and also in the effects that yarns can achieve when subjected to light. The English philosopher Francis Bacon said, all colours will agree in the dark. So without light, colours do not exist. But of course, as weavers and dyers, you know that there is a material basis to the different colours. So colour is something that changes. And here in this first image, you see a young woman wearing Isluga dress, which is very notable in the context of Andean textiles for the extent of its dark, large amount of dark, with brief, bright dashes of colour, so you get spots of brilliance. And this style of work, garments, come from Isluga, which is in the north of Chile, far north of Chile, next to Bolivia. And this is where I've been doing field work since 1986. In the 1980s, there was no electricity in Isluga. And you'll also notice that the houses do not have large windows. So textiles that were worn inside were very much seen in dark contexts. And I hope you notice that in the distance, that there's the outline of the volcano hill, which dominates that particular community. And hills have a very particular, profound significance in the Andes. And people do not initiate any kind of ritual process without first asking the Uiwiris, as they're called in the area, for permission to proceed. So I too am asking for permission to proceed with this talk about colour. What I found in the 1980s is that the older generations, especially of the women, they were not happy talking about colours, and they were extremely reticent. But as I was first starting my field work, my Aymara wasn't very good, and they were monolingual Aymara speakers. And this is something that puzzled me, that why have this reticence towards talking about colour. And then as time went by, in the 1990s, electricity was introduced to the community, and a generator was switched on in the evenings. And that's still the case today. So you can see the lampposts there. And you can also see the volcano hill, and this time it's got more snow because of the different season of the year. But the hill is an entity, there's very little vegetation on it, and the colours of the earth shine through. And people told me that they associate hills with bright colour within, and it should be associated with minerals. And there's a real sense of danger about these colours, that these hidden colours held within the depth, the entrails of the hills. And perhaps this is why people were very reluctant to speak about colour. But there are certain occasions when you have to bring bright colours out into the daylight. And when preparing for a ceremony called a wainu, people bring these colours into the daylight. And what you're seeing here is women and a man as well preparing chimpu, which is dyed fleece. and they use aniline dyes in the 1980s for tying onto the backs of llamas and alpacas. The lady on the far left refused to use yellow. The younger generations were bringing in yellow, but to her that was not a colour that she would use for that purpose. To start the Wayu celebration, there are libations made to the hills, and that's when the permission is asked to proceed with the ceremony. And the ceremony itself will only have effect if the correct music is sung and performed. And that's very sad sounding. It's a combination that Levi Strauss pointed out, that chromaticism often occurs in rather sad sounding oral contexts. During the ceremony, the llamas and alpacas are ritually dressed, and in the middle is a female alpaca. She's received her new garments for the coming year, but on her right you can see his head's covered by shadow, but you can see a fellow alpaca, and he's still got last year's chimpu tied to his spine and flanks, and that's faded in the course of the year. So faded has become useless, and it has to be re-energized, revitalized, and that's what he looked like after he was dressed. And that colour in alpaca fleece was highly prized in Aymara, so that's why people went to town lavishly dressing these two alpacas. And I'm sorry for the quality of this slide. It's scanned and rather poor scan from a slide, an old-fashioned Kodak slide. And it shows Natividad Castro Chayapa, who with her husband, really looked after me when I was in Isluga. And sadly, she died at the end of 1989. She was born at the beginning of the 20th century. She had two documents with different birthdays. And she'd given up weaving at the age of, well, in about 1986, I calculated. And she just said, I don't have the lungs for weaving anymore. But here you see her at a Wayu ceremony, and she's got in her hand, she's holding some chimpu. She showed me this shawl, which is a Gihya or a Wayu, that she wove in her youth with the help of her mother, who helped her with the dyeing. And this is very characteristic of textiles from Chiapa, which is a community in the valleys. And sadly, it's an area where weaving like this is no longer practiced. And it's got these very large open expanse of grey, which people talk about as the body of the textile. You sometimes see the word pampa, but the word cuerpo or body is also used. And then there's each side, there are these broad red stripes, which are then subdivided. And I'd also like to point out that kind of purplish blue that separates the red from the body of the textile. Now, Nati, or Natividad, was unusual because she could also speak Spanish, and so I started having more profound conversations with her. And if there was nobody else present, she would sometimes whisper things to me about colour. And one of the things she whispered to me was that it was her mother who helped her dye the red, and that her mother used a cactus. And she said it was llama. She was a lot more open about talking about cabbage fibre and things like that. Now, her daughter, Felisa, told me that her mother and her grandmother used a combination of aniline with tunelia. That's the fruit of this cactus. This example happens to be from northwest Argentina. And locally it's called airampu. So you've got a use here of a local plant with aniline dyes coming in from the global connections in the world of colours. And it's a plant that occurs between 2,000 and 3,800 metres above sea level in Chile, Argentina, Bolivia and Peru. Now, for those of you who do Spanish, I'll not go through this in detail, but in a 17th century publication, Bernabé Cobo talks about the different kinds of tunelia, which could be cultivated, which you probably know as opuntia. But there are other species, including the one I've just shown you. And he says there are others which are not cultivated. They're smaller species, and they're colorados, so they're red. And he then goes on to talk about the fact that they have these fruits called tunas, which are like olives, very red, and serve as a fine dye. You can do other things like making ice cream with it. Young women go and collect ice and make ice cream, and they dye it with this fruit. But as is the case with many potent colour substances, they're good for medicines as well. And Bernabé Cobo talks about this, that they've got qualities that you can use, and that the juice extracted from them can alleviate the heat of burning fevers. And he also mentions it's good for the kidneys and other cures. The name tuna, he says, is from La Isla Española, and in New Spain or Mexico it's called Nochtli, so he doesn't mention the local name, Irampu. But anyway, that's the origin of this red colour hue. I don't think that these slides do justice to it. I'd also draw your attention to the very narrow stripes, plain weave stripes, which, as Elena said, can be very, very significant in Aymara textiles. And then there's one pattern band. And that pattern band is called salda or salta, and it bears a design called churu, which you can also see in this coca bag, also woven by Natividad Castro Chayapa. And again, please look at the arrangement of those narrow colours that are not in gradations, as Dominique was showing in the gradations of blue. It's another way of organising colour. Other types of bag woven by Isluga women don't necessarily have any dyed colours, and this is a food-carrying bag that was woven by Teodora Flores, and you can see the arrangement of again, Elena referred to the word alpaca, and this interchanging of colours between stripes. Now, one day, Natividad told me that she saw a great butterfly, and she said it had wings like the notes, like a 5,000 peso note, and not as they are now. This is the old style, and that's how she described it. She was shocked by it because it was big and it was colourful, and that equates with danger. So one of her uncles tried to catch it with a hat and it flew away. But he said that was a good augury, that it was signifying that the money would come into the community. And shortly afterwards, an anthropologist turned up called Veronica Cerceda, and she started buying bags and belts. And she also brought in quantities of aniline dyes and vast amounts of acrylic yarn. And so Nati kind of pointed out the sheer scale of what she brought to the community in terms of these foreign goods. Thanks. And here's one of the food storage bags that Natividad wove with, and it introduces these synthetic colours. But look how she uses colour. I don't know if it comes across on the slide, but in that central grey band, which is undyed, she's got very narrow stripe of green, very narrow stripe of red, and it sets up this simultaneous visual effects in the eye of the beholder. It's just there and makes a very, very marked effect when you see the bag in certain lights. Though Veronica Saraceda rejected this bag because it didn't conform to Veronica Saraceda's typological classification of what an Isluga bag should look like. But Veronica was part of that change and bringing in these, especially these acrylic yarns in Isluga textiles. Natividad's daughter and other younger women in the community, women who are now in their 70s or late 60s, started using what's called Isa. Now, this is different from the way that Natividad organized her stripes. So you see here a series of stripes where there's a transition in steps of colour, as Dominique showed with the scales of blue in her presentation. And they're organised around a central pattern design called a salda, or a salda. So this loom is now in the Pyrrhus Museum, and it was woven by Isabel Chayapa Castro, and she was one of the first of the weavers to adopt these new designs, which the women say came from La Paz, and also this use of the word Isa in this context. So now a Isa is a gradation of colour, not a series of different narrow stripes. But you'll notice that the blue is in a similar position as Mama Nati's shawl that I showed earlier, with a more purplish colour, that you have a white band that has a red ground, and then you have a transition to a larger area of undyed colour, and the blue traditionally always occupies, it articulates that junction between the contrast between large expanse of undyed, small expanse of dyed. And you can use Isa with natural colours too, and here's one with undyed colours. Weavers now buy acrylic yarns. You can buy bags of them, yaquizado, which is sorry, 2 minutes. The bags of quizado yarns, and that's an Aymarization of the Spanish, are organised like this. And this is the colour palette that Isluga women use. It doesn't include yellow as an independent colour, it only comes part of other pieces. And here is a weaver, Soria Chayapa Mamani, and she's selecting the colour she's going to use for a belt. This shawl is woven by Luisa Castro, the daughter of Natividad. And again, you see the use of the blue. In this particular case, the band to the right has not got a red ground, it's got a grey ground. But you can see how she has combined the colours, using what has now become the Isluga style of weaving. And this is my last image for you. It's woven by Natividad's granddaughter. And it's a chuspa, it's a bag for ceremonial occasions for carrying cocoa. And it shows the kind of profusion of colour. It's no longer woven in camelid fibres, but in Medeca or acrylic yarns from the Bolivian market. So that has increasingly gained significance through time. So what I've done in this presentation is to give you a visual survey of changes through time, what people do, and I hope to have given you some kind of inkling into the context and especially how light is important for visualizing these textiles. So thank you very much.